Well, I'm just going to run through this because this is a much longer talk usually, but this is just a quick overview of us. We're a small country, but we're highly digitized. All kinds of wonderful statistics. Everyone has an ID card with a chip on it. Everyone uses mobile for anything requiring a chip. These are old statistics, but we basically say 2% of GDP per year through digitization of the governance. Interesting is that basically 0.3% of the population is in the IT sector, and that produces 7% of GDP. And then we have all these wonderful figures. We're like #1 here, there, and everywhere. Most important for me is, actually this is an old number, we're back to #1 at Freedom House for Internet Freedom. At the same time, we are #1 in Europe for security, which gives the lie to the notion that in order to have cybersecurity, you have to give something up when it comes to freedom. All right, so basically, all you need to know from my talk is that if you want to digitize something, and this is something that the United States has not gotten to, which is you need political will. Out of that, you get policy. If you have a policy, you will develop the laws, and if you have the laws, you can create the regulation necessary for it. The elements you need in order to digitize, and this is one of the big, in the Q&A we can discuss this, but one of the things that really freaks me out being in the mecca of IT for the world, that this doesn't happen and the shoddiest services for the public imaginable are right here, where in a 10-mile radius are the headquarters of Tesla, Apple, Google, Facebook, Palantir, and who knows else. But anyway, you need a strong identity, which I'll talk about, and with legal efficacy, and I'll tell you what that means. You have to do things that people like. You need a secure architecture, which I'll briefly talk about, and you need to guarantee data integrity. That, I hate to use the word blockchain, but that's what you need. How our system works, what I'll talk about, it's open source, non-proprietary software, so anyone can do it. In fact, 15 countries have taken it from us, and we give it away, and I call it foreign aid on a thumb drive. The whole thing has, from the beginning, had a very strong private sector involvement as well as NGO involvement, because everyone wanted to get in on this. The infrastructure I will talk about is actually quite old. It was created, it came in 2001, and all new services rely on this single architecture, which makes it easy to set up. Why did we do this? The explanation, people say, why did you guys do this? Well, it's summed up right here. We became independent for a second time after 50 years of Soviet, Nazi, and then again Soviet rule in 1991. If you look at the statistics, the last time people could measure GDP more or less, they didn't quite, but basically Estonia and Finland, our neighbor to the north, our linguistic cousins, had identical GDPs, per capita, that is. When we became independent again, Finland, when the first full year was 1992, and we had a GDP per capita 1/8 of what the Finns had, so this shows you the benefits of communist rule. What else there was Finland had this, and meanwhile, only 1/3 of Estonians even had that. And that's the difference. And so, but that was also the motivation for what we ended up doing. I can skip this. Basically, the big thing that happened and how I got involved in this, there were two things. One of them is that, I mean, those two slides talked about how, well, what are we going to do? How are we ever going to catch up? It's, you know, Zeno's paradox of Achilles and the turtle. Achilles never catches up with the turtle because even if you speed up reforms, the rich people who didn't have 50 years of Soviet rule will move on ahead of you. But then suddenly this came out, and it was in May of 1993, I hooked up into this thing in June of 1993, and this was the first web browser, which was 3 years after Tim Berners-Lee invented the HTTP, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol. But he made it, I mean, rather Mosaic, made it accessible to people. And you could buy it for on floppy disks for $29.95 or something. I don't remember what the cost was, but anyway. But this had one important thing, which is that everybody who got on the web at that point was starting exactly at the same place. And I said, aha, this is what we should be doing. And so I started pushing this for the government. The other thing we did, which was actually related to something else that we do in Estonia to this day, but I had this one-off unique experience. In 1969, that was 50 years ago, I was 15, so you can do the math on how old I am, that I had a math teacher who was doing her PhD in math education at Teachers College at Columbia. And I was, I lived near New York, and my math teacher decided to do this one-off experiment that only lasted 5 months, which was, can we teach kids to program? And so she rented a teletype machine with a perfo tape and with a big telephone modem and a mainframe somewhere 50 miles away, and we learned to program in BASIC. Of the kids, in that small group of kids in that class, I'm the only one who's still poor, and the rest are all in IT. I kind of did it too. But anyway, so 50 years later, I said, I mean, if I could learn as a 15-year-old how to use a computer and how to program, why don't we do this for the whole country? So I proposed this to the government. The government thought about it for a while. For a year, the Teachers Union weekly newspaper devoted at least one article to tell its readership how stupid I was and how evil I was, and I would ruin the Estonia's youth. But we end up with a program which we call Tiger Leap, in which we managed to get all schools online. Beginning in 96, by 1998, 99, all schools in Estonia had computers in a computer lab, and they were all connected. This was so successful, and this was so beloved by people, that the banks also took a look at this and said, this is pretty cool. We have so many little villages, each of them have 3 different banks, brick and mortar bank branches, and this is ridiculous. Why don't we teach older people how to use computers? And so we came up with this program, which Interalia did things such as, I went around, I was foreign minister, which was a draw actually, and I would go and meet old people in the countryside and show them how to use a computer. We set up in every single village, in their village center, a room with computers, again, partially paid for by the banks, which people could hook up and use any time of the day. And we would have these signs. We don't have them anymore because there's such deep penetration of the internet, but at that time with these signs, you drive around the country and you'd have the little @ symbol on the sign, and it would show 200 meters to the right to a internet access point. Anyway, but we realized, go back, you shouldn't see that yet, back. We realized by the end of the 90s that this was going to be a serious thing, and we have to approach digitization at a far more fundamental level than just putting up computers. And that was when we thought long and hard, and we realized this is the fundamental issue that, to this day, affects everybody, except Estonians, which is this. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And to this day, and when you use government sites in the United States, you use an email address and some silly password. Unfortunately, passwords, all single passwords are brute force breakable. So anything is hackable. So we thought long and hard about digital identities, and so what we decided was we're going to give everyone a digital identity in the country, and we will do this with a chip on an ID card. This was not hard to do by that time because you could travel around Europe with an ID card, so we were going to get ID cards anyway for everybody, so we thought might as well put a chip on it. All right, so, but we can just put a chip. We set up a system where you have 2-factor authentication. If you're at Stanford, you have a rather poor version of this called Duo. which is really a mess. But anyway, but it is two-factor authentication, so you get the security, and we have end-to-end encryption. Much more important, however, was giving this identity legal efficacy. What that means is you can sign a legal document with it. You can sign contracts, all bank transfers, all these things that require a signature in daily life. And having come back to the United States, looking at this thing called a check, I'm completely sort of, what the hell is that? But anyway, so we have that. And one of the key things that's difficult when we talk about policy and political will is that you have to really make the ID mandatory. Why? And we know from Europe, which has now 16 years later decided that every country should offer IDs, digital identities. If you make it voluntary, you'll have an uptake rate of about 15 to 20%, which is nice. It's kind of like the people who used to have Macs like 20 years ago. They're the early adopters, right? Everyone has a Mac today. But the problem is if you are either in the government or in the public sector, or if you're in the private sector, you look at this and you say, okay, 15%, 85% does not have this. Why should I bother? Why should I develop something? Why should I develop a service to be digital if, in fact, most people will not use it? So this is the crucial part. This is where the courage, political will part on the part of governments comes in, is that you have to make it mandatory. You don't have to use it. That's crucial. You can do everything online, on paper if you want, but you must have one, whether you use it as your own problem. What this has led to is today there are 3 transactions between the individual and, in some way, the public sector that you cannot do online. If you get married, you have to go register your marriage. Good idea. You both have to show up. If you get divorced, you also both have to show up. Not always so pleasant. And third, which is a big issue in the United States, the UK, is that we do not, for completely different reasons, but more ended up being the same, we do not allow the transfer of property without the physical presence of a member of the board of a company. That is, we do not allow anonymous shell companies. In other words, were there a Trump Tower in Estonia, you wouldn't be able to buy it through an anonymous shell, an apartment through an anonymous shell company, as we have seen, Miami, New York, London. It's a big problem. All right. So the key is the legal efficacy part, that you can do all these transactions legally online. Sometimes in the United States you do things which, like you go, okay, I'm doing this, but would this hold up in a court of law? It probably wouldn't hold up in a European court of law. I was invited to testify before the US Congress 2 years ago, and they sent me this thing I had to fill out. It was a PDF. First of all, I couldn't even type anything in on the PDF. I had to print it out, fill it out by hand, sign it, take it to the CSAC scanner, which of course would only let you send your scanned document back to your own Stanford address. So I sent it there. Then I printed it out. Then I signed it. I signed it first. Then I did the scanning. But anyway, the point is, then I shipped it off. Now, would that hold up in a court of law? I have my doubts, but anyway. Now, so we rolled this card. It looks like this, or it looks like that. That's how we hook up to a computer. Then one day, someone was very smart and said, well, it's a chip, right? So where else do you have a chip? You have a chip on your phone. So what you can do in my country is you just program your chip to be your ID as well. So you can do all of these things that you do with a computer, with your ID card, you can do with your mobile phone. Crucial to all of this is end-to-end encryption. That is from from your device, be it a computer or a mobile phone, until wherever it goes, it must be encrypted all the way through. And we have a very high level of, well, now we use elliptical. We were using RSA 2048, if that means anything to you, until we found out that the chip company was producing bad chips. And so we decided to go over to elliptical. And two-factor authentication. Now, most of you know what that is, yes? Hello? Does anyone not know what two-factor authentication is? You can not know, it's okay. Okay, good. Well, anyway, it's what you do at Stanford. It's something you know, and it's something you have. And you put those two together. In this case, we have a chip, and then you, on your device, put in your code. And then we do, this is what it looks like to sign a document. I was in Asunción, Paraguay, a year ago, and I got this email saying, you know, you forgot to sign this loan application, and if you don't do it by tomorrow, you're not going to get it. So I found Wi-Fi and pulled out my card and signed my loan application. All right. It's not enough to simply have an ID. The question is, how do you distribute all these things? And this is a big legal question, regulatory issue, and a civil and human rights issue and privacy issue. So what we did, this is more serendipity, but because we were too poor to actually have a big central database, we decided, and because everyone already had a server in the government and elsewhere, that, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to connect all the servers up through the architecture. But any access to the server would always have to be through an ID card with, or an ID chip with two-factor authentication. The idea of this and why it works and why it's crucial for security is, if any of you remember, there was this big tanker, the world's largest tanker called the Exxon Valdez that ran aground about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I don't know, it's all the same these days, but anyway, biggest oil spill in history. Well, the problem was that it was one big hold, right? Now, people got smart. They go, okay, we have lots of holes, so if you end up running aground, you will not create the world's largest oil spill, you will just have a little one. And now,
running a modern state is a data-centered endeavor. Ensuring the functioning of the state requires administering very large quantities of data. Estonia lacks a centralized or master database. Data is stored where it is created. Each agency administers its own data separately, and data is not duplicated. At the same time, state authorities and agencies need data outside their purviews in order to function. For example, the police constantly require information from the population register. Likewise, the unemployment insurance fund depends on information from the health information system. How can authorities securely exchange important data? First, the data must be easily accessible by the authorities that are authorized to use it. Second, the integrity of the data must be maintained. No third party should be able to make any changes to the data while it is in transit. Third, the data must remain confidential during its journey. It must be protected from the eyes of unauthorized parties. The X-Road is a data exchange platform that fulfills all three of these requirements. The X-Road makes life simpler for both the state and the citizens. For example, when a child is born, information about the birth is sent directly from the hospital to the population register. From there, it is sent automatically to the health insurance fund so that the child will have health insurance and a family physician. This prevents the creation of excessive paperwork and saves time. The state functions in the background. The X-Road helps authorities make work processes more convenient. Many activities can be automated, which frees employees to deal with matters that require human involvement. Authorities also don't have to worry about the authenticity of data. They can be confident that data received from the tax board definitely originated from the actual tax board. Additionally, the X-Road can be used regardless of what technology an authority uses. For the state, the X-Road, above all, makes it possible for authorities to efficiently exchange data among themselves. Sensitive information moves securely, and the system itself is so resilient that it cannot be easily brought down by those with malicious intentions. Since the birth of X-Road in 2001, the system has operated continuously without interruption. The X-Road helps the state see the big picture of how different authorities are connected to one another. In addition, the X-Road makes it possible to exchange data not only within the country, but also across national borders. That is, of course, if databases and information systems are working properly. The biggest beneficiaries of the X-Road are, of course, the citizens. They enjoy the benefits of a better functioning state and save all of the time they would otherwise spend submitting papers and forms. How much time? During the time it took you to watch this animation, the X-Road saved around 240 working hours in Estonia. Cool.
Now, this has a number of implications. The most important one is that this system, with the strong identity and with this kind of architecture, is, for the first time in the history of bureaucracy, since the invention of paper or the cuneiform clay tablet or whatever, bureaucracy can become a parallel process. Bureaucracy has always been a sequential process. You go and you fill out a form, and it'll go to one office, then it'll go to another office. Someone will go through a file, then it'll go to a third office, each time getting a stamp or something. That's kind of the standard Austro-Hungarian method of bureaucracy, also the kind you have in the US government. So if you want to start a company in my country, you go and you have to fulfill all the same requirements you have to do in other EU countries, which is, every member of the board has to be checked. Have they paid their alimony? Have they paid their taxes? Have they committed any crimes? Have they paid their child support? I mean, all of these different things that have to be checked in order for a company to be started. In Italy, up till 2 years ago, it took 18 months to start a company because all of these processes had to be done. They were all done by hand and on paper, and going from ministry to agency to ministry to agency. In Estonia, it takes 15 minutes. So parallel processing is something that really speeds things up. There's another implication of this because all of the data are there and everything is identified via your unique legal identity, is that the government may not ask you for any information it already has. I mean, you don't have to write your address every time you do your taxes because they already know what your address is. You just log on and it says, okay, you're that address. You have this many children, and so on. Another great sort of result of this is a massive reduction in corruption. There are two kinds of, basically there are two kinds of corruption. There's one kind of corruption which is the kind that always makes the headlines, where you're paying some guy off to get a good deal. And you're paying him to do something illegal. In most of the world, except for sort of more developed countries, you have to, there's the other kind of corruption where you have to pay someone to do something that's legal. It's a way of actually subsidizing your civil service. I went to Greece, I talked about this, said, oh, we have a name for that, it's called speed-up cash. So if you want something done, well, I mean, the bureaucrat has to do it, but you want to speed it up, you want to get it done, you have to pay him. Once you do this, you can actually make all of these different services which are essentially non-discretionary. That is, okay, you have this many kids, you live that place, you're this age, you get this. All of that can be done by machines, and you get it. Okay, I'll just skip this. I'll go pass through this. Told you the once only rule. All right, and the final thing that I just want to talk about, which is important, is the issue of data integrity. People always ask, well, what about your privacy? You can do in the Q&A, you can ask me about this, but basically privacy is very strictly regulated in this system. But what is far more important is data integrity. The difference between these two concepts is privacy is if someone finds out and, say, publishes my blood type or my meager bank account. All right, someone's violated my privacy. Far worse is if someone changes the record of my blood type. That could be fatal. Or someone empties my bank account. Or you can think of one example after another of where you want to make sure the data are not changed. And so since 2007, we have put all crucial national data on a distributed ledger, more commonly known as a blockchain. It is a private blockchain as opposed to all this Bitcoin stuff, which if you believe in, well, that's nice. But in any case, just a certain number of authorities will sign off on any change, as opposed to Bitcoin, where everybody has to sign off on every change. So it's all instantaneous. But we have, I mean, the least interesting things. So for example, well, first of all our laws are only published digitally. You don't want anyone changing those. Even more interesting is that all of our court cases exist only digitally. We don't have these big court cases, I mean, books and books and books that you'll see in the law school here of court cases. They're all online, but you don't want someone to change the result of a court case because that could result in pretty weird stuff. All right, and so we brought in a number of other things. We have e-voting, we vote online. People say, how can you do that? How can you trust that? Well, in fact, since there are hundreds of millions of transactions a year using the same system of the authentication and then this system, the X-Road, then you're actually doing what you do every day anyway. E-prescriptions, which is that no one goes to a pharmacy with a paper prescription anymore, and if you want it refilled, you call up or you write an email to your doctor. More interestingly is that we have now done, so far the only country is that we actually have cross-border digital prescriptions, which is that Finland, we get about 8 million Finnish tourists a year. There only are 5 million Finns, so they come a lot. And they're always having a good time because alcohol is cheaper in Estonia, and they lose their medicine. And so I proposed to the president of Finland 6 years ago that, oh, look, you've adopted our system, so why don't we make it interchangeable? And he said, great idea, let's do it. It took 6 years to put this into effect, which goes back to my first point here. It's about political will, laws, and regulation. The technical part of hooking up two different countries' digital prescriptions is, how much time do I have? 2 minutes, would take 3 weeks. However, then you have to start worrying about all these things like we subsidize these things for people over 63, and they subsidize those drugs for people over 65, and then we subsidize that much and they that much. This is in order to avoid arbitrage and no one making a buck off this service. That took like 5-6 years to get done. And then we moved on just very quickly in my last 2 minutes. First of all, e-residency, we suddenly realized one day, or not so suddenly, but realized that a paper world has been tied to geography. And in fact, there are many things that you can do that have nothing, once you go digital, have nothing to do with where you live. For example, setting up a bank account. For example, starting a company. So we offer digital residency to people, which means that you don't get political rights, you don't get social rights, but you can, say, if you're British, and you're a small British company, and you're not Jaguar, you don't have any offices in the EU, and the UK is going to leave the EU. So, but you want to sell to the EU without paying all those tariffs that are going to come in. So you want to set yourself up as a European company. So you set it up in Estonia. You don't have to go there. And so that is the idea behind e-residency. We've got about 50,000 people who are now e-residents. And the main benefit for us is if you set up a company in my country, then you pay taxes for that country, for that company in my country. On the other hand, it gives people from all over the world the right to set up businesses in the European Union. And finally, data embassy, something which, if you're from a small country, is perhaps of interest. The US, not so much, but after the Fukushima, let me just go here. These are all the countries that are in the process of adopting our system. And okay, Fukushima. And Fukushima was, tsunami. That's the tsunami. Then that caused the meltdown. And Japan lost some part of its national data. And we said, this is quite bad. Estonia is not in a seismically active region, but we're a small country, and in the past 1,000 years, we get invaded an average of twice a century. 20th century was kind of bad. We had 7 times. You know, some other centuries were not so bad. But so what we decided to do is to create this idea of the data embassy, which is using the Vienna Convention on diplomatic immunity and extraterritoriality, the same convention that allowed Julian Assange to spend 6 years in London. But we did that. We have a server. We don't call him Julian, but we have a server in Luxembourg, which has 24/7 real-time online information on all of these major databases, which we do not want to lose should we be invaded again. And so, you know, e-voting, National Citizen Registry, taxes, the business registry, the property registry, that's not even up there, I think. But anyway, all these things that if you were to be invaded, or if you have a big earthquake, you might lose. In the United States, it's not a problem because you can put all these things all over the place. If you're Greece, I would suggest, well, given your seismic activity history, I would also contemplate putting a mirror of your data there, somewhere else. I mean, you know. Anyway, so that's basically, I do this, I talk a lot in Latin America, so gracias.